And this lesson is actually a continuation of what we had from the start. Now, we are focusing on the practical techniques, the practical skills, because we are equipping ourselves with the knowledge, but then what is required of us? The application part of it. So a significant part of this lesson will actually capture the approaches and how to employ them in our very own settings. So So basically, most of what we've discussed in lesson 1 is continued in lesson 2 about rangeland and the communities that do pastoral activities and soil and water conservation practices. So in this particular session, we are going to actually have knowledge on how we can effectively manage soil and water, and then practices for the communities, target communities that are in regions that are arid and semi-arid regions that actually do pastoral activities. How do we help to conserve and preserve and even make the rangelands better for the pastoral activities? So under this, we shall have, first of all, set the stage by understanding what rangeland is all about and why would we restore the rangeland communities. Then part of this discussion will also have techniques, practical techniques of helping the communities, because as well we come from different communities, helping the communities employ these sustainable practices towards climate smart farming. So as part of this, towards the end of the presentation, we shall have hands-on practical techniques, of which maybe courtesy of time may not employ the practical aspects, but we shall have some materials which we shall interact with that will help us apply this in our respective settings. So we'll set the stage off with rangeland restoration. And as we have captured this in the previous presentation, speaking of rangeland, you know, before I look at how I restore the rangeland, I need to understand what a rangeland is. Most of us come from communities that maybe do crop farming, but there are some areas which do not do crop farming because of unfairly distributed or low levels of rain. So they delve in practices like pastoral farming and all that. In those communities, we have extensive pieces of land which are not used for crop farming, but then they're used for livestock, they're used for wildlife, like cases in Naivasha, and others are just left there with no use. And so we are going to look at the process of reserving these kind of lands, because they benefit the pastoral communities, they benefit wildlife, and they help because of biodiversity, as we are going to see. And so how are we going to recreate this and help our rangeland become even better? So we're going to learn how to create more resilient pastures, and so we can support pastoral activities and reduce conflicts and cover aspects like how is it related to agripreneurship, how is it related to economic activities and all those aspects. And so having known that these lands are actually important, because, you know, sometimes you can be so insensitive when you come from areas which have fairly distributed rainfall. We are thinking of how does this person who is in a region which has relatively low rain benefit from this practice or this session. How do we empower them if they don't do crop farming, but they do pastoral farming? So focusing on these communities, we'll have some techniques that we shall actually cover, so we can understand deeply how do we practice this in the community. Now, rotational grazing, this is a practice that we've captured, and it helps because of the communities that we have captured, like those coming from Kajiado, those coming from Samburu and Turkana, where there is extensive pastoral farming, where people move with cattle for grazing, looking for pastures. So how do we reduce the degradation of those grasslands? Because with the climate change, extreme temperatures, it has come to the notice of, or to our notice that there is extensive destruction of vegetation. And therefore, these people end up losing pasture for their livestock. So rotational grazing is actually an important approach, and it has been illustrated here. It has been covered already, where you distribute the land and divide the land into partitions which are called paddocks, so that there can be an orderly way of feeding the livestock, so that at a certain period, as you can see, the herds are grazing at a certain location, so that other points are being left for regeneration of pastures, so that they can be left for a certain period and then have a proper distribution of feeding practice whereby the grasslands are regenerating. And why would you employ that? One, you want to prevent overgrazing, because with continued grazing with a lot of livestock, there'll be deprivation of vegetation. Two, you want to give time for the grass at other regions to regenerate. Then you also want to enhance the soil fertility, because you realize that as you graze, we've been reminded of climate smart farming. As you graze, we are having the waste from the animals at that place being distributed. Then with the time, this waste is actually useful to the pasture. Then during that period of regeneration, you're having your pasture that is healthy and resilient in that case. So this works in communal lands, like the Maasai communities, Turkana communities, and all that. Now, besides this aspect of dry lands and maybe harsh temperatures, there are some regions which have grasslands, but they are not fairly distributed, because a lot or a significant part of the land has been occupied by bush. You know, we have some species of plants which just occupy a region. They do not have a significant, probably medicinal value or all that, but they've occupied a significant part of this rangeland. And so they are occupying a significant part of the land that would be then or otherwise be used for grazing. How are we going to maximize on these kinds of pastures or these kinds of rangelands? There comes another approach called bush encroachment control. We're doing away with other kind of plants that are not useful for the herds or the livestock, and we are creating more space for grazing in the land. So basically that is it. This is just an example of a plant, the Prosopis juliflora. It is just an example of a plant that is commonly distributed in our regions. And when we do away with such and have significant land for grazing, then that helps us to restore our rangeland. So this is a depiction of different regions, different climates, and actually it represents the aspect of bush control relative to the relevance of the bush at that particular area. So we are not saying that we are going to do deforestation. No, this is not the concept. But in a region where we have a semi-arid land and the main activity that has to be done there is actually grazing, then we need to create more space for that. So that in a region where we have climates that favor tropical growth of region that favor plants that are actually in a climate that is favored by tropical plants, then we can capitalize on the vegetation. Now, another approach which has been captured here is now we want to also replenish the pastures. We want to have quality pastures in our rangelands. What can we introduce so that we have resilient pastures? There comes the concept of drought resilient forage. For one reason, it can survive under those harsh climatic conditions, because we are looking at semi-arid and arid regions. Then two, nutritionally, even to the animals, that is a plus. Then three, under those conditions, you're obtaining something that will help withstand climatic conditions at that place. So we are targeting crops like Sengerus, Celerius, Stylosanthes, okay, sorry, I'm not a scientist, but that one, a legume forage. Okay, these provide high quality fodder for the animals. So those are the advantages. Leguminous crops, as we've covered in our foundational science, the benefits that they have in extensive farming for the animals, for replenishing the soil, for determining the soil organic matter, and all those benefits. That is why we would consider such kinds of crops. Now, okay, to the next slide. Now, this one has been captured, of course: drought resistant, nutrient fortification, quality forage, and biodiversity, so that we also enhance what you call humus, or the substance of the soil. We have microorganisms well packaged in the soil because of the introduction of the crops. Now, how can we achieve this? How can we achieve this, what we are calling the practical approaches? I've learned about rotational grazing. I've learned about planting these crops. How can I actually execute it so that it is practical and now useful to the communities? We have an activity here which has a grazing calendar. And this is just a sample. But this is actually a takeaway for you and for me, that I come from that community. How can I help them to practice rotational grazing and reduce these problems in a broad view of conflicts? How can I empower the community to apply these practices? You can come up with a grazing calendar, which helps us. One, it is responsive to the climate and aspects of weather at that place. How is the rain distributed in this region? And now, for how long can livestock and how many cows relatively can take for this certain period to graze in this land? So that is the essence of the grazing calendar. So that for counties that have conflicts like Laikipia, Baringo, and Turkana because of grazing, they can, if the community is empowered at regional level, we can have effective calendars which we know that at this particular point, this particular community will be grazing at this point because they have a technical know-how of how the climate changes and all that. Now, that is the essence of it, mediating the conflict. Because the conflicts that we've had in the past relating to pastoral activities arise from the competition for pastures. And so we roll out such like and adopt such like programs, then they help us to manage these conflicts because the communities are advised properly on how to graze their livestock. Now, there is another aspect that we are going to discuss here because the lesson was about restoring the rangeland, and then part of it soil conservation and water. So this is the second aspect of that particular discussion, and is about soil conservation. And there are a lot of issues that have been raised in science and in research generally about soil conservation. And we are going to have subsequent modules about soil conservation as we learn. But one of the critical issue that has come by is soil erosion. And this happens because of different agencies. It could be a lot of rainfall distribution, winds, and all that. And this has to do with losing the matter in the top layer of the soil, which is very, very important. And it determines a lot of activities when it comes to farming and sustainable farming. And so this challenge has become so severe in such a way that the improper rainfall distribution is causing a lot of nutrient deprivation in soil. And so we have to tackle the problem. How do we tackle the problem? Because once essential nutrients are not in the soil, then we cannot practice sustainable farming. How do we address this problem? Both in areas that have a lot of rain and areas that do not have fairly distributed rain. The next slide. Now, there is a practice that Prof set the stage with, and it is important for us to also discuss it just for a little time about contour farming. You see, there are regions which have not utilized their spaces properly. Why? Because they do not have the knowledge or the know-how of sustainable practices in farming because of their landscape. And an example is a region in Mount Kenya or western regions that are actually hilly, mountainous regions. And people often complain of lack of nutrients on hilly regions and all that because of erosion. So this is a practice that comes in handy, contour farming. Not along the slope, but across, as we have learned, because that one will reduce that water runoff and therefore help the nutrients to be conserved. As you can see, contour interval. Part of the activities that we're going to cover here is how do we make these contour lines? How do we make contour stones and all that? You see, this is farming that is done along the contour. A contour line is actually defined in simple words as a line that is actually perpendicular to the slope. And so if this is the slope down, then the lines that are perpendicular to the slope are actually contour lines. And we do that, or we practice that, so that we can reduce washing away of nutrients. So this actually depicts contour lines in a nutshell, and how farming should be done, so that your crops are planted along the lines as opposed to down the contour. Now, okay, so basically this is a technique as I had prepared you in advance. This session is actually going to be learning the practical approach, and we are actually going to have sessions where we briefly will look at how do we construct effective contours, so that at the end of the day we are achieving this aspect of sustainable farming. So there is an approach which we are going to interact with. We are going to look at the video. It's actually called an A-frame approach of building contours. It's not a lot to cover, but it's a guide to help you to create proper contours so you can do farming. Now, when as he organizes to launch the video, now you realize that you can have a piece of land that has not been used for quite some time, and you are not very knowledgeable about how you can create accurate and well-ordered contour lines. This practical technique helps us. It's called an A-frame contour approach for building contour lines. So I would wish that we interact with this session. It's actually a 4-minute video, something. I don't know if there is a way, because it's quite slow. If there is a way you can adjust the speed to maybe 1.5, then that could be fine.
Contouring means farming with a row pattern nearly level around the hill. Contouring can reduce the soil erosion of hill farming. The A-frame is used to identify points at the same level of elevation by marking out a horizontal lines across the slope. Farming across the slope helps to shorten the slope length. Contour farming slows water down and let it soak into the soil. Let the A-frame stand on the ground. Contour lines near to the highest points.
Okay. Much of the video is actually illustrating how to use A-frame to construct the contours. But the basic thing is coming up with it's not a costly approach in developing accurate and more useful contours, because it only needs you to have some pieces of wood and construct an A-shaped frame. So you can place it along the contour and start demarcating lines so that they can form your lines for planting whatever you need to plant. And so that is an easier way of managing and having contours. And now the question comes, where you come from or in the community, could there be a person you would advise to use this? And could there be a possibility that even in our own homes, we have some lands that have been unused because of the question of the nutrient factor and the productivity? And can we capitalize on that? So this is a takeaway for us to have this and help develop those. Now, that was a good approach. Why? Because it focuses on addressing soil erosion. And then it helps in helping enhance productivity because of nutrients. Then because of the climatic changes, because our main focus is climate smart. Because of the climatic changes, you see, sometimes we have heavy rains, sometimes we don't have rains anymore. They've disappeared already. We don't want to lose the moisture content in soil so fast. And so it also helps in what we call water infiltration. So that is the thing, high survival rates of seedlings, increased biomass. Now there is another technique here. It's about now collecting water. We have areas that are not endowed well with rains. Now we ask ourselves a question, how do we capitalize on having adequate moisture content in the soil that would sustain our crops for an extended period of time? This leads us to the very last aspect of this presentation, and it's actually about soil and water conservation still, because we want to look at how do we capitalize on that little rain and actually collect water, and how do we keep this water. So there is a technique about micro catchments. We are going to see multiple techniques here and there. When we talk about catchments, basically, what would you understand by the word catchments in the sense or in a perspective of collecting water or collecting something in catchment? Yes. Yes, you did raise you didn't. Yes. So it's actually, okay, I could be disappointing someone by not choosing them. It is so unfair. Okay, thank you. So it's more about harvesting. It's more about harvesting. We've harvested water from the roof at home. We've harvested water in tanks and all that. But we want to look at how do we apply this in farming and extensively. So that is what we want to achieve in microcatchment. And our focus is, one, to improve the soil moisture, because that is important for crop production. Two, to improve infiltration. When we talk about infiltration, then it has to do with water distribution in the soil or down the soil. Then, of course, increased biomass production. I hope most of us by now know that soil content is a constituent of a lot of factors. Microorganisms, there are a lot of factors that contribute to fertility. Microorganisms, we have decomposing plants and animals and all that makes soil to be fertile for agriculture. And so And so it is important for us to employ these catchment techniques. So this is one of the techniques, is actually called a micro catchment technique, where you create a small kind of a ditch or a space in the soil where on a slope water can run and settle in because of the growth of a crop or the plants that we have. Now, another task is going to be about building catchment. This is easy. We target the crops that we have, then build ditches or some small catchments for collecting water. Now, we may not have look at the video because of time, but I would discuss something about check dams. We have a concept about dams, and we've spoken about dams in areas that have a lot of water. But then how can we capitalize on these in areas that do not have a lot of water? There comes a concept of check dams. These are small barriers that are built in areas that do not have a lot of rain, so that we can have water to be collected at a certain point to maintain the moisture of that region. And the primary purpose is actually to reduce the speed, the speed of water, the water runoff, which contributes to erosion. And then the question is, how do they work? How do they work? Naturally, without control, water just runs off down the slope. And so with these barriers, we are able to trap some water and then maintain the moisture at that place and slow down the speed of water. Now, these are comparison of actually the techniques, having the contour store lines and having the micro catchments and check dams. The most important thing here is knowing where to apply, because contours can be applied all over field wide. For micro catchments, plant specific, because as we have discussed, you build catchment for a specific plant. Then check dams can be done for points which have channels, yeah, like gully. Now, and so this introduces you to now going to the field and trying to employ these techniques to collect water, to maintain soil moisture through the techniques that have been discussed before. Now, using Ephraim, this is more of the technique that we learned, and it's actually about having the tool. What is called the tool? Tool should not scare you. It's actually the wood that is A-shaped, that is used to create the contour lines. Now, these are guides for building contour lines, a system using the Ephraim to mark across the slope, then having stones and blocks, barriers that will reduce water runoff. So they are practical guides. They guide you to specific activity for the area and the technique that you would wish to use. And so one of the goals that we are trying to achieve here is maintaining soil moisture and improving infiltration. Infiltration is actually the rate at which water enters the soil. Yeah, it percolates the soil in a more scientific term. So when we are controlling this, we want to moderate the soil moisture that will be helpful for sustainable plant growth. So when we use the techniques, then we achieve that. Now, in a bigger picture, because now we are looking at these techniques, but we ask ourselves, in a bigger picture, how is the community, the society going to benefit in agricultural aspect, economic aspects, and the ecosystem at large until we face this challenge? So by enhancing moisture content and better infiltration, there is better plant growth, and therefore that helps us to improve yields. High income for them that are doing agriculture, for both pastoral farming, for those for doing crop production. These practices that we've learned are actually going to help them, because agriculture is the livelihood of many people in our regions. And so as we wrap up the whole thing, these approaches actually catch on the whole framework of climate smart farming. And it helps because it integrates practices that restore rangeland, maintain soil and water moisture, and actually create sustainable lands for productivity. And so the result, in a nutshell, having a resilient, productive, and sustainable agricultural livelihood. That is both for them that have a lot of rains, those that don't have fairly distributed rains. Maybe in the next like 1.5 minutes, I'll invite any contribution if you have one. It could come in a form of an addition, in a form of a question. Then probably I might have a question for you.